Hello, everyone. Welcome to this session, Global Green Finance Trend and Tokyo's Challenge. My name is Trista Bridges, and I'm going to be your moderator today for what's going to be a very interesting discussion about green finance and ESG, two very pertinent topics at the moment, and also areas where we're seeing a lot of growth globally. I have three very prominent panelists joining me today for this discussion. And actually, in the interest of time, what I'd like to do is get into our discussion right away, and I'll introduce the panelists to you as we go through the session. So first, I'd like to introduce Naoko Nemoto, who is a professor at Waseda Business School. Hello, Naoko. Thank you so much for joining us for this session. One of the first things I'd like to do, if we can, is talk a little bit about the global trends that we're seeing at the moment in green finance. And could you provide us a short overview of what you're seeing, what you think the biggest opportunities are in this space at the moment?
Okay, thank you. It is not some green finance, but a little bit broader investment. But according to GSI report, in this year, global ESG investment reached $35 trillion in 2020, increased 50% in the past 4 years. And according to the recent IMF report, net inflows in sustainable funds increased notably in 2020 compared to traditional funds as COVID-19 crisis raised investors' awareness to catastrophic events. And in Japan, the movement is slightly slow compared to US and Europe, but we have seen a very rapid growth in Japan, and currently about 52% of assets under management incorporate the ESG factors.
Very interesting. And so, as I understand, particularly in the last couple of years, you've seen quite a bit of growth. And I know Tokyo and Japan in general has experienced, it's been an incredible market growth for them in this particular market. Can you tell us a little bit about the dynamics around this in ESG? You said it's a little bit slower in Japan, but it's definitely taking off more recently. What opportunities do you see, and what challenges do you see for Japan?
Uh, Thank you for asking me. I think Japan, we are at a turning point, and I just said that the progress has been relatively slow, and some data collection is still underway, and corporates have just started to incorporate ESG factors in their core businesses. However, I think we have very big some future potentials. One is in Japan, there are many industries which have quite high carbon emissions, and they need a lot of investment. I mean, they need to invest a lot to attain the goal of the net carbon zero. And in Japan, many companies have very advanced technologies which will mitigate the climate risk, such as hydrogens or hydropowers or storages. And so they really like to link these business technology and the future strategies. Japan is a little bit slow, but I think there's a very great potentials in the
Mm.
future.
Interesting. And it seems that Japan also has a lot to offer the world too, as well, in this particular areas. Thank you so much, Naoko. Let's move on to our next panelist, Mr. Stephen Fitzgerald. And he's joining us from Affirmative Investment Management in the UK. Thank you so much for joining us today, Stephen.
Thanks,
Um,
Trista.
and I know this is, green finance is basically your market. It's the space that you operate in. I'm curious to know, in terms of what you've seen, perhaps in Europe, the UK, other markets versus Japan, in terms of Japan, and how does Japan become a leader in this space? What do you think needs to happen? What maybe needs to change? What capabilities are needed?
Yeah, thanks very much. And I would agree with Professor Nemoto that Japan had perhaps been a little slower on this journey compared to, in particular, Europe, who has really been the leader in the move to sustainable finance. But we're seeing a rapid catch up from Japan, both from issuance, so issuance out of companies and government in Japan, including the Tokyo metropolitan government, but also investor demand, both at the institutional level and also at the individual level through mutual funds. And so Japan is really beginning to accelerate, and the requirements in Japan are no different to elsewhere in the world. This is all about delivering mainstream returns and positive impact, consistent with the UN principles for responsible investment, and more recently, the commitments to net zero that we've seen in COP from asset managers and asset owners. And Japanese investors are really beginning to embrace this.
Great. And actually, COP is a very important and timely topic that I do want to come back to and talk about a little bit more later on. So certainly, thank you so much for mentioning that. Before we kind of come back to that discussion, one of the things I would like to do is talk a little bit about enablers for this market. And we have joining us today, Takayuki Watanabe-san from KPMG Consulting. Thank you so much for joining us today, Takayuki-san. So Watanabe-san, can you talk to us a little bit about the technologies that are important for growing the green finance market? I know that in finance in general, technology is very important. What are the specific things that you think are important for this market to grow?
Yeah. So in terms of technology, for example, so using the AI, so some startups provides the ESG analytics to evaluate the company's ESG activities, which asset managers easy to allocate the assets to the ESG manners. And so this is one of the technology boost the ESG investment. And the another is so carbon footprint. The carbon footprint is to track companies' CO2 emissions and supply chains CO2 emissions, which makes the institutional investors and financial institutions easy to track the decarbonization activities of companies. I think this can boost the sustainable investment as well. So yeah, I think these two technologies is one key technologies of the to boost sustainable investment, for example.
Absolutely, I'd agree wholeheartedly. And one thing I did want to ask you about, because there's many people who are listening to this panel today who are perhaps thinking about coming into the Japanese market. So, you know, we have the program that's been talked about, the Tokyo Metropolitan Government Subsidy Program for green finance. What do you think is particularly needed in terms of technologies in Japan that would be very helpful? I know you talked about, I guess, carbon footprinting and AI are one. Can you elaborate on that or suggest some others?
Yeah. So firstly, for example, so carbon footprint is one of the emerging technology in Japan. So there's some startups and some big companies is now trying to develop and trying to implement it. But in Japan, so the major product hasn't been delivered now. So I think this is one of the blue ocean technology in Japan. The another one is ESG investment tools. For example, so using the AI and to evaluate the company's ESG activities, and so that may help investors to allocate their portfolio more ESG wise. So I think this may be a good technologies for Japan, I think.
Very interesting. Thank you so much. And talking about Japan and Tokyo specifically, and Tokyo specifically, actually, I would like to come back to Naoko and talk a little bit about Tokyo as a city for green finance versus some other urban centers in the world. Obviously, there's many markets that are vying to become strong in this area. What are some things that you think make Tokyo a particularly good market for green finance?
Okay, yeah, thank you for asking me. I'd like to point out three things. One is kind of people's awareness. I think Japan is very exposed to their natural disasters, and some people have very increasingly more concern about the climate change risk. And also, Japan's corporate traditionally has really valued their contribution to society or planet and environment. That's culture is embedded in some corporates. And second thing is some concentration of industries and markets. So it's a kind of problem for Japanese policymakers that everything is very concentrated in Tokyo. But the flip side of coins are in Tokyo, it's very convenient to do businesses. So we have markets and so many companies, headquarters, and labs and universities and so on. That's another good thing. And third is I really like to know opinion with Trista, but many people think it's a very nice place to live. Yes. And for instance, UK economists published a ranking of the liabilities of cities, and Tokyo ranks fourth among 140 cities in the world. So I very like to stress these strengths, and I hope that some more and more new companies are coming and develop the markets and foster some green finance here.
Well, I definitely would say it's a very nice city and offers a very good quality of life in particular, I think. And I think we live quite well here in Tokyo, which is great. And actually, one of the things that I wanted to say as well, as a follow-up to Takayuki's point a little bit earlier about the things that are needed in this market, that actually sometimes that's great for a company if there's not that many companies already in that space, so there's a lot of innovation, I think, that opportunities here for young companies. And so actually, I would like to now go back to Stephen, because he's somebody who has a great company, who has an investment firm that actually came here. So he did this. And I'm interested to know from you, Stephen, what did you find attractive about Tokyo as a market, and Japan generally? And also, what was challenging and what pleasantly surprised you?
Thanks very much. And I would just concur. I did live in Japan, in Tokyo, a number of years ago, and it is also a great place to live, which is important. But for us, when we looked at the potential opportunities for AIM globally, we identified the Japanese market as one of the core markets for us, because Japanese investors are embracing sustainable finance, in particular green finance. And the Japanese scale of assets is very significant on the global scale. In addition, as we are green bond investors, about 17% of Japanese financial assets are invested in non-yen fixed income. So again, a very large marketplace for us. We're beginning to see more issuance from Japanese companies and government, which is great, supports the market. And then we were very pleased to be able to partner with SMBC in Japan, clearly one of the major financial institutions. So that partnership helps. And then we got great support from the FSA as we proceeded to get our Type 4 asset management license. The support we got from the FSA, and in particular, a new desk within the SFA designed to support foreign asset managers moving to Japan. And I think in particular, asset managers such as ourselves that are focused on green finance, which is again a consistent policy, if you like, on building Tokyo as a center for green finance. And so we found the support from our clients, from our partnership with the SMBC, but also from the regulator to be terrific in Japan, and a big opportunity for us.
Great. And were there any, the last couple of questions, anything challenging and anything really pleasantly surprising? I think it's always good to talk about that too.
Yeah, very good question. Challenging is the similar challenges, just getting the best people into your organization. We were very lucky that we could have Mitsuo Kojima join to lead us, our business in Japan. Having the right people on the ground is absolutely critical as well, that are connected back into the rest of our relatively small organization. So hiring the right people is critical. And then all the normal challenges of finding office space and setting up and registering companies and things. But they're normal challenges that once you get through them, you can proceed to build your business. What I love about Japan is whilst it takes time to build relationships, the relationships are very long-standing and have a lot of longevity. So you put the work in to build strong relationships with your partners, including the regulators, but they maintain those relationships for a very long time.
I would definitely second that. I think that that's something that makes Japan quite special, actually. Actually agree with that. And question coming back to Takayuki-san, talking again about entry into Japan. What are some interesting collaboration examples or models that you could imagine for international companies, non-Japanese companies coming into the Japanese market? I know Stephen talked a little bit about his relationship with SMBC, which is, I think, a really interesting one. Any other thoughts on that?
Okay, so the Japanese companies, for example, mega banks, for example, so SMBC, and so securities companies are interesting to collaborate with overseas companies, for example, which have the advanced technologies. So in the last year, I have hosted the FinTech program of the Tokyo government, and I have the meeting with a lot of Japanese companies and overseas neighbors, and so the Japanese companies are very eager to collaborate with overseas fintechs and so overseas technology companies in order to acquire and so develop the new business to enter new fields. For example, some electric companies and the for example, energy companies eager to enter the financial market, but they have to collaborate with startups or any other enabled companies in order to enter new business. So I think in Japan, there is a lot of opportunities to expand the business for overseas companies. I think the first mover will get a lot of fruits from Japanese market. So I think the challenges are very expected from Japanese companies.
Absolutely. And actually, I think we sometimes forget just the scale of Japan in terms of the companies. There's so many companies and so many opportunities, I think, to find companies that are a good fit for you and from a partnership perspective in this market. Japan is still the third largest economy in the world. So certainly a lot of opportunity for partnership here. And we're obviously in the middle of COP26, which is extremely important in this particular market, talking about green finance. And Stephen mentioned this a bit earlier, and I'd like to come back to this and have a bit of a discussion about this now, because I'm sure this is at the top of everyone's minds. So Stephen, can you give us some thoughts around what you think the role of asset management firms will be in response to COP26? And then maybe we can talk a little bit about Japan as well and their role in COP26 to kind of conclude.
Yeah, thanks, Trista. You're absolutely right. Financial services firms have a critical role to play in the transition to net zero, and this has been recognized at COP. The estimated cost of the transition to net zero is about 120 trillion US dollars, which obviously is a vast amount of money. But the Glasgow Financial Alliance to net zero, the total numbers that Mark Carney talked about at COP actually exceed that level. And therefore, the finance sector is going to have an absolutely critical role in financing the transition to a low carbon world. And asset management in particular has a critical role as well, with over 50 trillion US dollars of assets under management now committed to a net zero investment strategy. So the money is there. We are ready to deploy assets to support net zero, whether that be through green bonds or sustainability bonds, but also in equity markets, in companies that are leading a transition to a low carbon world, including those in hard to abate sectors such as energy or shipping, and there are some real leaders there. And also investors in the technology that's going to be required to transition to a low carbon world. And I would agree with the other speakers. Many of those companies are going to be in Japan, are going to be the leaders in producing the technology, or in more traditional companies in a transition to a zero carbon world. And we see that from governments as well as companies in Japan.
Interesting. And as a follow-up question quickly about COP26, you talked about the role that the finance community will be playing. I know there have been some pretty significant financial commitments that have already been made. There's this consortium of the finance community that's come together, as well as countries. Any thoughts on some of the things that you've seen coming out of COP26 that you find particularly interesting in that space?
Yeah, so the financial commitments are huge. I mean, we are talking, again, Mark Carney brought it up, but 130 trillion across the alliance, 50 trillion just in asset managers alone. And I think the great thing about these commitments is it's a focus on forward-looking analysis. It's a focus on a transition, and it's a focus on positive selection. So it's a focus on the positive selection of leaders in this transition, whether they be governments or companies. But the other side of that is there's an inevitable level of exclusion of companies and or governments that fail to have ambitious commitments, that fail to have targets, and fail to have plans to go towards a net zero. So the real focus is on that positive selection, but the other side of that is that companies and governments that are not on that journey will be excluded from investable universes.
Very interesting. I'd like to talk with Naoko for just a moment or get her thoughts on, from an academic perspective, this topic, because I imagine there's a lot of discussion around it, particularly in Japan, Japan's role in this transition. I know Japan's been very active at COP26. Prime Minister Kishida-san has been very active in the last couple of days. Any thoughts or things that you're seeing from an academic perspective in particular, or even just a business perspective that you're seeing around how that's going to transform things here in Japan?
Oh, thank you for your question. Yeah, first, like Stephen said, I think what I was impressed with some policymakers really stress on the importance of the private sector's investment role. Janet Yellen, for instance, very stressed that the public fund is not enough, and some private funding would be quite important. And to have this platforms to foster investment, that more disclosure and quality data would be quite important. And some conference very focused that they would require more disclosure to private sectors. And as for the climate-related risk, I mean, many Japanese companies are still at the kind of development stage. And for instance, as for some information of the supply chains, subsidiaries, they are still struggling to have the collect data. So what I thought was Japanese companies really need to accelerate their some commitment or their some efforts and leverage. I mean, try to explore more alliance with foreign companies to leverage their expertise in how to get that data and how to analyze those data. That's my thoughts.
Great. Thank you very much. And so I think we're coming close to the end of our session now. What I'd very much like to do is maybe in closing, maybe if each of the panelists could give just some final thoughts on the market and where they think it may go in the future, and what opportunities and any other areas of development that you may see. Please, whoever would like to go first. Maybe.
Okay. First, thank you very much for today's session. So for overseas listeners, so we would like to meet in Japan. So with you. So and the KPMG can support the market entry. So I think so making for example, so making collaboration with Japanese companies. So please ask us if you like to enter the Japanese market. And I think so Tokyo Metropolitan Government so they are now doing many activities to promote the investment from overseas. So please ask us, and so let's enter and make your business bigger.
Great, thank you so much. Naoko, any final thoughts from you?
Thank you. I'd like to stress that we are really at a turning point, and I think we'll see some great momentums in the green finance areas. And as Steve said, that there could be some shortage of some high-profile labor force. But in that case, please contact our university. We have a lot of foreign students. I mean, or of course, Japanese students and foreign students who are very able to speak various languages and have some exposure to various cultures. So we really welcome to connect those resources with your company. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. And final word, Stephen, please.
Thank you. Well, I first would agree with Professor Nemoto-san that this change, we are at a turning point globally and including in Japan. And the momentum behind the move to green and sustainable finance is huge. And it's being driven by investors. It's being driven by young investors and older investors, both institutional investors and individual investors. And the world is changing, and the opportunity for companies and governments is enormous, and the opportunity for investors is enormous as well.
Great. Thank you so much for the panelists. I, for one, personally am very excited about the opportunities in this space. In my work, I've seen a huge change in the last few years in terms of organizations, companies, financial institutions, engagement around the opportunity to create a more sustainable financial system, to have more financial instruments that are dealing with many of the challenging issues that we're dealing with in the climate space. So thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate that. And for all those who are interested in the Tokyo Metropolitan Government program, subsidy program for green finance, you can find more information in the information, I believe, about this particular session. There should be a link to direct you to information about that program. So thank you so much for joining today.